we're going to run this a little bit differently to some of the panel sessions we've had in the past, and rather than inviting each person to give an overall summary of what's going on in their jurisdiction, we're going to get straight into the questions. We're going to run this more like a Q&A forum with some, I guess, based around some themes. And we did put an invite out for people to ask some questions, and one of the questions that came through was on the energy from waste theme, which is where we left off. But before I get into that, just let me quickly introduce who we have here on our exciting panel, and I mean that, despite the fact that it's policy and regulation. This is actually really exciting stuff. And these are the people who are going to make all these wonderful things that we've just been talking about actually happen and translate that to making things to work. So we have Alex Taylor, who's the Manager of Waste Regulation for ACT No Waste. Sorry, I should have started in order. I got excited when I saw your face there, Alex. But up on the end, we have Jeff Robson, who's the Executive Director for the Queensland Environment Policy and Planning for the Department of Environment and Science, Des. We have Kathy Gunter from New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. We have Dominic Nichols, who's the Manager of Waste and Resource Recovery from the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. We have Tiana Nan from South Australia from the EPA, and we have Gail Sloan from Waste Management. We don't have anyone from the federal government, as you can see, but Gail has been running around and talking to a lot of different people, so we'll fill some of that role as to coordination questions. So, can I just say, don't hold back waiting for questions. If you've got burning items, issues, get your hand in the air now, because I've stolen all the microphones, so we've only got one busy lady who's going to have to run around. So get your hands up now if you have something that you want to come out in this panel. Where we're going to start the conversation, though, is on the energy from waste topic, which is, I guess, where we left off on the last one. There was a comment that came through, a question that came through yesterday. I think energy from waste came up in the context as a potential response to the recycling bans, and I think it was categorically said, no, this isn't the answer to recycling, but it does have a place. I guess from a policy perspective, I'm keen to understand where the thinking's at for the different jurisdictions, and Kathy, we might start with New South Wales as to, I guess, your view and what does your policy see the role for energy from waste?
That's loud. I would agree with the discussion that happened on energy from waste yesterday and even earlier this morning. Energy from waste we do see it as part of a modern integrated waste management system for the state. It is not the solution to national sword. It's long term, and it's certainly not there to replace resource recovery.
Yeah, okay. Now, Dominic, do you want to, we heard Stan mention that it's something that's on the focus for Victoria in the very near future. What's going on?
Yep. So in Victoria, we see a role for waste to energy. As Stan said, we're currently developing a policy on waste to energy. We've done extensive consultation on it. I think it's difficult. I mean, for state government, there's a lot of things we can do. We've got a lot of levers in terms of waste to energy. We do the regulation through the EPA, so we want to see clean waste to energy plants. We control the landfill levy, which we understand is one of the barriers to making waste to energy economically viable at the moment. It's complicated because any changes you make to the landfill levy, you've got to make sure you think about illegal dumping and costs for communities and local councils if you increase the landfill levy. So we've been doing a lot of deep thinking on what levers we can pull in terms of waste to energy. We see there's a role for state government, in terms of social licence. I think there's a lot that we can do in educating communities on waste to energy. And probably the other thing is making sure that we're informed in our approvals. I think the lack of knowledge and the newness of the technology has been one of the delays to approvals in waste to energy projects. So making sure that we as state government can be as integrated and as smooth as possible in terms of that. Those are some of the things we're thinking through.
Not to scare you guys, I guess the questions get increasingly hard as we go down the line when we talk about a topic, but that's all I understand, and that's both of you have a great a great view as to where it can fit in. My question is, what about the issues of developing this independently and separately? Jeff, I'm going to throw to you because you look too comfortable up the end by yourself. So you know, what are the challenges of each of you developing your thoughts and your process around this individually?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Garth, I assure you, if I look comfortable down the end here, no, it's just an act. Well, Queensland is trying to learn from where the other states are at. They are ahead of us in terms of developing their policies, and we're already engaging with the other states through the National Waste Working Group to share information on the development of waste-to-energy policies in the different jurisdictions. That's the point of your question, isn't it, in terms of, how are the states working together? Yeah, so we're certainly doing that. And for Queensland, and I'll probably say more about this in response to other answers, but we are developing a new waste strategy underpinned by a waste disposal levy. So certainly waste to energy is part and parcel of the development of a new waste strategy, and it's quite useful and timely for us to be learning from where the other states are at. And also, interestingly, for Queensland, our local government association is also expressing a very strong interest in energy from waste. So I'm not sure if that's the case in other jurisdictions or not, but we'll certainly be sharing those sort of updates when we next meet with our colleagues interstate. And I think there's a meeting coming up in the next month or two, if I remember rightly.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolise the conversation, but just one thing on that. I think as jurisdictions, we need to get together better on these sorts of policies and these sorts of reforms. I think that's one of the things that we're not doing as well as we could. I think, as you can see, there's the Commonwealth Government missing from this panel at the moment. I think there's a huge opportunity. There was a meeting of Environment Ministers just recently in April where, as Stan said earlier, they agreed to update the national waste policy by the end of the year. I think that is a huge opportunity for jurisdictions to get together and have a look at where we can align what we're doing. And I think we need to think along those lines. There's also a really important role for national industry bodies to play, like WAMA, ACOR. I think in the absence of strong national leadership at the moment, I think it's the industry bodies who are really pushing things forward right now. That's what we need to think about.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so we just had a question from the floor, or a burgeoning question from the floor.
Hello. Is this working? Just a question to pick up on something that Dominic said. What would be the relationship between the waste levy and potential waste to energy projects?
I feel like I've answered a lot of questions, so if someone else wants to, they can.
We might. Tiana, you...
I think it's a live issue for a range of the jurisdictions at the moment. For South Australia, we have, similar to Victoria's timing, had an energy from waste discussion paper out, and we've really gone to our stakeholders to ask some of their views about whether any levy should apply in relation to energy from waste facilities, whether there should be a partial levy, elements there. And so that's one of those policy decisions that's still moving forward in that role. I would just emphasise that from a policy perspective, we're very much the same as the other jurisdictions speaking, where you're wanting to make sure that energy from waste is for residual waste, that you're not cannibalising away from higher order recovery options.
Can I just ask, though, the question that I think you also were asking when the point Dominic said the levy has an impact on energy. And the question, I think the point in Victoria at the moment, because their levy is 50% of New South Wales, it's about $68 at the moment, yeah? So the challenge with it being low, and, others can argue that's not low, but New South Wales $123.50, I think, or $138, something like that. So the issue is with landfill still being cheaper than energy for waste, because it's a nonsense to think that a gate fee for energy for waste will probably be less than $160 to $200 a tonne, I think. So whilst landfill is seen more attractive from a cost perspective, it's a barrier for people having an ongoing supply, certain supply into their energy facility. So that's the challenge. So one of the things that, to be blunt, I think Victoria's looking at is if it proceeds with its energy for waste policy, will any ever get built while the levy remains at about $60 a tonne? SA is just about to go to over $100 a tonne next year, right? So nearly every other jurisdiction, except Queensland, which is coming soon, has a levy at a much higher level. Yeah. So, and the point of the levy is to incentivise your supply into those alternative technologies, right? Because you can avoid the levy by not landfilling. Woot woot.
I want to make it clear also, it's not just the landfill. So landfill levy is one factor in the economics that make waste to energy work. The cost of electricity, if electricity prices can be sold for a higher amount, then that would also be something that would make waste to energy economically viable. It's also the scale of the operation. So at the moment, smaller scale waste to energy facilities are more economically viable than larger scales. So raising the landfill levy is not the only solution to make waste to energy work.
Question. And we do have energy for waste facilities now acting really well. So people like Visy has 3 of them on the eastern seaboard that is actually taking their landfill and putting it into energy or cogen. So we actually do have them in operating now, and the public is okay with it.
I'm going to take that segue there because we've got lots of exciting things to talk about, but I'm going to take that segue into the landfill levy side. And I think we all know we've got the interstate transport issue that we'll come back to, but Alex, what's happening in the ACT in terms of thinking about how you price things without achieving all the negative aspects?
Yeah, thanks, Garth. I guess in the ACT, we're quite an unusual jurisdiction. We're local council as well as the state government as well, and being a very small geographic area, we've got a lot of integration and so on that's happening. I guess in the policy front, we've actually put out this week a waste feasibility study discussion paper, which actually lists a variety of recommendations, and that's open for public comment at the moment. And inside that, it talks about energy from waste, it talks about levies, it talks about PEF and things like that as well, FOGO, all sorts of things. So I'd certainly encourage people to have a look through that. I guess that's really going to inform how we progress forward from here. So,
what about can you talk a bit about the licensing regime? Because as you say, you're a small island and people can quickly drive out of there if it gets too hard.
Yeah, that's right. What we've got is we have new legislation that started in the ACT in July last year, the Waste Management and Resource Recovery Act. What that does, it sort of gives a regulatory underpinning to the waste strategy in the ACT 2011-2025, which for one thing has a very aspirational target of 90% diversion from landfill. So certainly the legislation combined with all of these initiatives in the feasibility study really is the pathway that we're going to try and achieve that. Under the Waste Act, one of the key things for us is understanding industry, understanding the waste sector. So we actually will licence all waste facilities in the ACT irrespective of size. There are no thresholds, and similarly we'll also register all the waste transporters. So anyone moving waste into, within, out of the ACT, and there will be quarterly reporting under these schemes as well. So that will certainly give us a very comprehensive data set, which of course then will inform our decision making and our interventions moving forward.
Okay. Jeff, you're surprised that we started the landfill conversation without asking the direct question. What's happening in Queensland? That's I can't believe there's not a sea of hands. You guys are all looking a bit lazy this morning, but what's happening in Queensland?
So what's happening in Queensland? Quite a lot, as Gail said, coming soon. Will be new waste strategy with a waste disposal levy. So that was announced on the 20th of March by the state government. So we've obviously been working away quite busily to provide the government the detailed options on implementation. We've also commenced the stakeholder consultation on that as well, and we're meeting with stakeholders again Monday. And that's a diverse group, obviously has the representatives from local government and the peak recycling waste industry associations, but we've also brought in the small business and industry and the construction industry representatives as well. And one of the important aspects of the direction we are taking is we are treating it very much as an economic and industry development approach. We're being supported by the Queensland Treasury Corporation, which is an agency in Queensland that their main job is managing the state's balance sheet, but they also provide a range of consultancy services to local government and the state government. So we're drawing on their economic expertise, and we're certainly drawing on the stakeholder group as well to get a sense of what are the things that need to be addressed in a waste strategy so that industry can invest and grow, so we see that investment that's required for greater recycling.
Are they actually physically salivating? Because I imagine they look at New South Wales, Kathy, and having that levy structure, New South Wales has plenty of money in the system, and there might be questions about how that's allocated, but I imagine Treasury I imagine they're quite excited to talk to you at the moment, Jeff.
Yes, it's nice to get that level of excitement. In fact, it is a very important time for Queensland because we are getting a lot of momentum on the issues that have been discussed this morning and no doubt yesterday as well, although I only joined the conference last night, so I missed yesterday's discussion. But yes, we're getting a lot of engagement, not just from Treasury, but from other portfolios right across government. Planning is an essential portfolio in this discussion, and certainly the stakeholder group made it a priority at the first meeting for the process to look at the issues around planning and what's required there to support investment in the industry as well. And yeah, a whole lot of interest from a range of departments.
Kathy, just back to you. I guess we're all going through the unfolding that the China ban impacts. How important has it been to have a war chest that you can argue over how you spend it, to at least have something that you can argue about?
Yep, that has been an advantage, I suppose. But of course, we don't want to move away or dismantle what we've designed with Waste Less, Recycle More. It was designed in response to the review of the waste levy in the first place that KPMG did in June 2012. So I guess a lot of the programs that we already had in place that were being funded by Waste Less, Recycle More already, like the major infrastructure grants, the expansion enhancements and so on, are already able to deal with some of the sort of more medium, longer term issues that come up through National Sword. But yeah, it was definitely an advantage to already have some funds there, but it's always a difficult decision to figure out which ones can just sort of pivot, as Stan was saying yesterday, to better target National Sword, and which ones, where we need to actually just find additional funds to put out there, like the Recycling Relief Fund.
It's actually great. So the federal government has dipped its toe in the water, and woohoo! We were all excited that at least at the last MEM, waste was on the agenda, and at least there's a commitment to do something. It's an interesting question though. The funds, they don't have a waste levy to get there. What is the role of the federal government? Gail, I'll start you.
Well, first of all, they've got to educate the minister. They've got 2 E's after his name, environment and energy. But once we get past that, I think they've actually got to start thinking like the European Union. Because the big challenge that I see, and I guess I see it firsthand going around between states, every state I go to has a different set of approaches, regulations, and it's a real challenge to work within that environment. Like you cross the border and you've got a whole set of regulations, and things like CDS have really highlighted that. I think there's a real gap in the vision as to where Australia wants to go, and that's the role of the federal government. The 2009 strategy, which I'm sure you've all read, there's 16 key deliverables under that, and a lot of the things in there, such as sustainable procurement, packaging, all those things that if we'd started doing in 2009, we wouldn't be sitting here today, to be frank. But nobody's really driven that or had that vision for it. So it's great that I guess we're all on that pendulum of diversion. It would be greater if we were all on the same place on that pendulum. It would be greater if we had a common vision about recyclables and recycled material. And if we could just take away and agree some of that low-hanging fruit, like green public procurement, mandating of, non-virgin materials, and have a vision for that, we could focus on the other bits, because there's so much more to be done, And I do feel like we end up dealing with some of the low-hanging fruit, like container deposits. I think that's a 40-year-old scheme, but we got it. We need to move on with it. And we need to really focus and have a common view as to where we're going to end up in Australia.
I got really excited then. I thought there was a message from the crowd, but it's... We've added diabetes,
Added diabetes.
Sorry. Segue though, Tiana, it would seem that South Australia probably has been moving along this journey a bit faster, or started a bit earlier on things. What are some of the experiences in that circular economy front, and how is that being supported by your policy and regulations down there?
Yep, certainly. So we have promoted it for a long time in various ways. Both Gail has said how we have the separation between some of our funding and policy arms and our regulatory arms. One, we work very closely together in that. And two, I think it's around some bravery and recognising the multiple benefits that come from things. We have had container deposits for over 40 years now. We have a recovery rate of over 80%. It's seen as a state icon, and I'm so glad to see other states coming to that point and seeing that community support, and I really hope it succeeds and gets picked up. We, as a state, recognise that national harmonisation is desired by everyone as well, so we'll continue to work into national conversations around that space. We also introduced the plastic bag ban back in 2009, which has had an enormous impact on the amount of plastic bags going to landfill or in the litter stream, even allowing for the extra sales of bin liners. We remain committed to that. The vision of the Waste Strategy 2015-2020 from Green Industries is to have a resource-efficient economy. We released a report on the potential benefits of a circular economy in South Australia in 2017, which showed that close to 26,000 jobs could be created. Nearly 21,000 of those are in the material efficiency, the rest are largely in energy efficiency. And so now South Australia is really working on those next steps around those practical implementation parts of where will you get your biggest benefits. And that ties through cohesively through our regulatory approach, where we seek to promote the waste management hierarchy in accordance with the principles of ESD under the Environment Protection Act, but also through the infrastructure grant programs, and also at the moment with the China sword recycling market development grants as well.
Okay, we've got another question from the crowd.
Thanks, Garth. We have a very state-based approach in our discussion today, and Gail mentioned before the importance of getting that federal standardisation, but we have a glaring, I suppose, gap over there in that Western Australia isn't currently represented, and we sometimes have quite an East Coast versus West Coast approach. How do we ensure that we're encapsulating WA into that conversation? Because often, they can stand alone, to ensure that we are really truly looking at a federal standard, Gail?
Yep, that's a good question. And can a show of hands, is there anyone from WA in the room? Because I think I bumped into a couple. Yep. So we've got a few representatives there, but we haven't got anyone on the panel. And I know it is a well done getting over here, because I know it's a hike. Who wants to? Dominic, you've grabbed that microphone with glee. Dominic wants to answer that one.
Just on the WA question, that's been something that we've been thinking about in Victoria recently, because we've noticed with MEM, the Meeting of Environment Ministers, and Labor governments across the country, there has been increasing conversations between our minister and Western Australia's minister, and increasingly looking for alignment across those Labor governments, current Labor governments across the country. So yeah, we've been talking to Western Australia quite a bit lately. We want to talk to them some more about circular economy ideas and what they're doing on plastic bags, CDS. So I mean, we're starting to make that connection. We recognise it's a long way over there. So it's, yeah.
And Jeff, I believe there'd be a fair bit of traffic at the moment, particularly on that CDS front that Dominic just finished. But both Queensland and WA are looking at that front.
Yes, that's right, Garth, and we've been talking to WA about our plastic bag ban, and they've taken an interest in that, so that's nice for Queensland to be able to sort of be having some momentum on an issue where we can help another state, and also with the container deposit systems as well. There's been a lot of discussion amongst the states on that. We are, of course, looking to get alignment with the way things operate between states where that's possible. But of course, each state's pursuing, a model that it believes is fit for purpose for its own state. So, it's very important in that context to keep the discussions going, so you can get as much harmonisation where you possibly can, while still fulfilling a government's need to get that fit for purpose model.
You actually share a border, yeah.
We do, and we certainly speak with Western Australia about a range of issues, particularly some of the construction and demolition fills and the like as well. But I just wanted to make a broader answer back to that question about national interaction and harmonisation. I think one of the things that I have seen in recent years as someone who's worked in this area for about 10 odd years is in the absence of strong Australian government leadership, the heads of EPA, which is an informal group that meets a couple of times a year, has set up its National Waste Working Group, and that often involves the director level, and I just think that has been a fabulous mechanism for actually sharing the work that's going on. So some of Victoria's work around stockpiling post-fires, you know, they have shared and encouraged that across. We have things that we're sharing back, and at the officer level also there is just much more cross-collaboration. And so I want to encourage that that's happening, and that includes Tasmania, Western Australia and the Northern Territory. And the National Waste Working Group has a practice of moving its meetings around the country. So a recent one was in the Northern Territory.
Okay. And that seems to be a theme, that some of these things we talk about are happening informally, and I guess if that works, then that's good. But
believe me, we still want a stronger role for the Australian government.
yeah, it seems a bit scary that it's related to personalities, and if someone if key staff change, that things can. It seems like it should be a slightly more formalised approach. But
I fully agree.
no, okay. Crowds, you are being really. Hello, Tanya. Sorry if it'll take a second to get down there. Sorry, she's hiding down in that back corner.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I've made life really hard by stealing all the microphones from the floor. But
Hi, I just had a question about data and data sharing, and sharing IP, I guess, around making data available to the industry, especially to support recycling markets, local recycling markets. Victoria have a portal available and make that data available to the public. I guess I'm wondering what's happening across the different states to share on that kind of idea.
I'm going to actually start that with you, Alex, because I know it's something that the ACT's put a lot of thought into.
Yeah, and actually further to the comments before about the HEPA Waste Working Group, data is actually one of the standing agenda items for the meetings that I've attended. So certainly it is front and foremost in terms of jurisdictions and how they work together. The challenge, of course, with data is to make data consistent, use the same terminology, the same definitions, and that in itself is quite a challenge. Certainly for us in the ACT, we will be collecting a lot of data. That data is going to inform our interventions and so on. Certainly at an aggregated level, I can imagine this will form a very useful base for a variety of audiences and so on. For us, the challenge, of course, is to start collecting the data to get all of the industry regulated and so on in the ACT. So it's definitely not an overnight thing. It's going to take a while to bring this together. It's
a good point, that timeliness, though, of data. And, we live in an electronic world, but it still seems that it takes a very long time from when these things are being submitted to when they're accessible. And I know we can only move at the pace of the slowest member. What can we do to speed that up? Because it's one thing to have good data, but if it's 5 years out of date, I don't know how often I've had to explain to people outside our industry, this is the latest available data, and they're going, why? And how do we speed it up?
Yeah, sure. It's absolutely a challenge to have currency in the data and timeliness in the data as well, and it really depends on the schedule of how often you collect it, but also the mode, the way you collect the data as well. If you're relying on a paper-based system, obviously it's going to take a long time. If you're going to invest in IT infrastructure and so on, again, you can set yourself up to take a long time and make things complicated, or you can try and be a bit more agile. One thing we're actually looking to do is looking into this question. How do we collect the data? How do we make it easy for people to report? And similarly, how do we make it easier for us to make sense of that data and tell the story in the back end? It's one of those things. It'd be great to point to a great example that I've got prepared already, but I don't have one just in my pocket.
I think I was just going to say, to add to that, one of the issues with data is on the surface it seems really simple, like let's just agree on the same definitions, collect the same data and share it, but it's often so deeply entwined to our regulatory definitions and legislation, and so it'll involve all states agreeing to definitions, agreeing to what data you're going to get, and then all going away and changing the regulations, which is, you know, it's still something that should happen, but as you can see, it's a massive undertaking. It's going to involve costs to certain people, benefits to certain people, and so it's not as simple as just agreeing on definitions. Again, it could probably benefit from some national leadership or, just pressure from the people who are suffering because of the lack of consistent data as well. I mean, it's probably one of the ways that we can start working through it.
Tiana, let's shift gear a little bit because we've got lots of exciting things, but let's talk about some of the things that you can see from data. One of the things that South Australia started a while ago was the requiring things to not be disposed straight to landfill. I'll let you explain it, but what have you seen? What's happening?
So back in 2012, in a staged manner, we introduced a series of landfill bans, and including for electronic waste, at the same time that the analogue televisions were being turned off and the scheme was starting up. And I would say there that we have a recycling activity statement that is compiled each year, which gives a very detailed background on the recycling of a range of materials, and it shows that over the last few years we've more than doubled the e-waste that's been recovered. And that's quite an achievement given that South Australia already had a grant and recycling program that was supporting e-waste collection ahead of the national scheme coming in. So it does help highlight where there are successes. I think in the broader answer to that as well, so it shows the outcomes of your policy measures, which is what we all want and why we're seeking that broader reporting. South Australia is moving towards seeking mass balance reporting as well, similar to some of the other jurisdictions. And we had a discussion paper out on that last year, and we'll move to releasing draft regulations this year. But the recycling activity statement report shows us that over 86% of our material is recovered locally. We have an 81.5% overall recycling rate, so again we can measure that. But with that breakdown of material, we're speaking to a circular economy, local and global. What can we do? What can we shift? It shows the materials that we should be focusing on. What is actually still going overseas? What's going into state? And where can we have the greatest results and improvements?
Okay. Jeff, so there's a few different models as to how you can achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve in terms of not having waste going into holes in the ground. You've looked around, obviously, at the current time. Levy has been the announcement. Talk us through some thinking there.
Yes, that's right, but levy's part of the announcement, and so the government has certainly announced that it wants to develop a new waste strategy. Our existing strategy is largely based on a series of voluntary actions. The feedback from stakeholders is that there's not been enough leadership and direction from government in the existing waste strategy. So that's why the government, or one of the reasons why the government has announced it does want us to develop a new strategy. And yes, the levy will be a key feature of that. But as I mentioned before, we certainly want to take an economic development approach to the recycling industry. So the levy provides a price signal for resource recovery. So that does obviously encourage that investment. It also provides a source of funding for programs. So we're obviously getting feedback from the stakeholder advisory group at the moment on the different sort of programs that might be necessary for accompanying the waste strategy. And yes, we're certainly looking around at the actions in other states. And the challenge for Queensland is, we're talking now about circular economy principles, and we're certainly very interested to have a greater discussion within Queensland on that. But we're starting from a pretty low base of low recycling. Our recycling rates are in the mid-40s, so somewhat different to South Australia's, but we're certainly looking at South Australia as one example where they've thought through things like landfill disposal bans. It's our view that you can't do these sort of things in isolation, that there's got to be a comprehensive approach. Levy is a key part of that, but your companion regulatory measures like landfill disposal bans can work alongside those sort of price signals, programs and other market measures.
Yeah. Can I speak there again? I think one of the things that really flows from that, it's great to see that strategy development happening, because a key, of course, as everyone in this audience says, is around reinvestment of the levy and the directions of that. So I think one of the things that has helped South Australia get to where it is that focus on infrastructure grants and also grants to local government around having the right infrastructure to recover your materials.
Okay. We do have a question here. We have John. You're there first.
Really? Thanks, Garth. I won't say who I am, other than we are poor. I'd just like to make a couple of comments, if I could. I don't want to stir the pot unnecessarily, but we seem to have a fatal flaw here at how we deal with waste policy. I think Tony Curry and Ian Malouf piped up a couple of comments yesterday that they basically said the waste contractors will fix our problems. They have the power to do that and the ability to do that if the policy's right. They work for a profit. Who else fixes the problem? The last one standing, which is local government. With the end of pipe solution people, do we see any people on local government sitting up in the panel? No. Do we see any waste contractors sitting up in the panel? No.
Can't have everyone on one
Representing
panel,
them?
but that's why you guys have got microphones out there so that we can. But we need to, you know.
All I'm saying is they need to be part of the equation, that's all. It has to be a bit more inclusive and collaborative. We've seen some dramatic change, I suppose, in policy in New South Wales in recent years, and thankfully the EPA has been very consultative about it.
So I'm going to take a diversion around your question there, but let's talk about that, getting away from being the end of pipe solution, and you know, and all waste being a cost that's equally shared by local government across there. We've got container deposit being a rolling out, as we mentioned earlier. You know, Kathy, we'll start with you, but let's talk about that. That's a great example of getting away from an end of pipe solution to the people who are making it and using it actually paying for the responsible management of it. What happens next? Where do we go?
Where to from here? Difficult to find out what the question is. I guess, look, the CDS rollout in New South Wales are not even 6 months in yet. They've collected now over 300 million containers, and it's looking like about 3 to 3.5 million containers per day are being collected. So it's the takeoff of the scheme has been pretty astronomical. There are now almost 600 collection points in less than 6 months. So I think the rollout of the collection points has got there as well. I guess in terms of lessons learned for other states, which was something that we were sort of talking about, discussing, I guess we've learned a lot of lessons through the rollout of CDS. One of them that we're tackling right now is litter at the actual RBM sites. Because this was much more of a problem at the beginning, where people weren't still quite sure about which containers were eligible and which ones weren't. So having that information and education from the outset is really, really important, keeping that strong, and also having infrastructure on the site to make sure that if you've got containers that aren't eligible, that they go to the right place, so that there's signage and infrastructure there that is dealt with and emptied regularly is really important as well.
Okay, so Alex, you're next. ACT started this saying they wanted to be as similar as they could to New South Wales, but have the advantage of 6 months of data. What's different?
Yeah, I guess the example just then about collection points and I guess the kind of equipment and condition of the site actually is a good example. And certainly for me, I live in New South Wales, I work in the ACT, so I do use the RVM in Queanbeyan, so I have seen right from the get-go what it actually looked like right at the start, and certainly over time I think it has improved. So that, that coalface type experience of what actually happens on the ground is quite good to see. I mean, the ACT, we have a lot of similarities obviously with the New South Wales scheme, but we will have differences in our collection points as well. We will be drawing on, I guess, social enterprise to deliver a lot of services and so on, which is consistent with, I guess, how a lot of things roll out in the ACT. But yeah, look, we go live at the end of June, so there's not much time. We're gearing up to that, and obviously there's a lot to do in a very short period.
Okay. So I'm going to avoid talking to the South Australian about CDL because I know you've got so much more to say.
Policy comment.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
But look, Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I just want to address that comment about policy and markets and getting out of the way. I would say that everyone in this room knows that the waste industry are very innovative and great at finding new paths. But I don't want to underestimate the role of policy, and hopefully that's why a range of you are in the room. Because by setting recovery targets, by showing interest in certain areas, you achieve directions and outcomes. Clearly, we're sitting here with very different recovery rates, but a lot of national companies. It does change how people invest. And also on the larger scale, like South Australia has a lead smelter, Nearstar, which is undergoing a transformation. We were speaking to circuit boards before. As part of that, we've seen that e-waste opportunity, and it will now become a multi-metals recovery facility, recovering all of those. That transformation was an over $600 million investment overall. $290 million was put forward by the state government to underwrite that. That shifts, that is a regional thing. It creates mountains of jobs, and it also has better environmental outcomes. But also in e-waste recycling and different things, we've had closed-loop recycling. Grants have been given in South Australia to local plastics reprocessors in the past to help recover that. Those things shift the game.
We have a question up the back there.
Sorry. Sarah Paparo, Muchman Hill Consulting. Just in relation to the scope for policy incentives, and even assuming we do sort of have higher waste levies and indeed harmonisation of waste levies in Australia, I'm thinking about the sorts of emerging technologies, advanced conversion technologies, really cutting edge stuff, and how we might bring that to market in Australia. I've just spent the past couple of years working in the UK for the government managing long-term subsidy contracts for waste-to-energy plant using the most advanced conversion technologies and incorporating combined heat and power. And those contracts were structured as contract for difference, which interestingly is the type of subsidy contract that has been used in the ACT and that will soon be awarded in Victoria to subsidise large-scale wind and solar. So I'm just wondering if among any of the states there is any appetite for incubating emerging technologies in relation to waste conversion.
I'm actually going to throw to Gail on that one. So, it's a thanks, Garth. But let's talk about that. How do we get new infrastructure, new systems? How do we make significant changes and not the incremental improvements that we're all working so hard every day on? But how do we get some big changes, new infrastructure, new things on the ground?
I guess what I'm seeing as I go around, and I do want to come back to that comment on policy that John made, that we are actually seeing increasingly jurisdictions, again, probably acting alone, but also the federal in this one with their grant. Like I know WAMA's involved with a grant with the Australian Research Council for one currently, we've been in the past. There's a lot of money going from, and a lot of support from all jurisdictions towards the research and development and universities. Like we heard from Vina this morning and what they're doing with SMART. We've got UTS who've done a great work on waste into wealth strategy in their cluster. So it's absolutely recognised, I think, as part of the 4 pillars for going circular, and Stan, you and I have got this tattooed on our head. R&D is absolutely part of that and supporting people and universities and academics who are looking at those difficult waste streams. So we know what to do with those bulk waste streams very well, but we've got a lot of good work and support and finance going into those from both industry and academia and government. I applaud SV and their end of market strategy. It's the and their work that they do with brokering relationships between research and difficult waste. There is a lot of that going on. We probably just don't talk about it that much. So I think there is big appetite for that. I do think it comes very much back to Ian's not here, and I probably wouldn't have used the balls comment, but I do think very much it's about government setting policy and giving us certainty as an industry in order to then go and invest and do it. And we've got the ability to do it, and we're the risk takers and we're the ones who know what to do. So the key for us is that government gets policy right. I don't accept that the waste industry and local government is not at the table in policy development at the moment. I have got great frequent flyer miles that don't get you anything, but I cannot tell you how many meetings I go to in states as a representative of the industry. I cannot congratulate some states enough for how much time they're talking to us as industry. If some people don't feel like they're being spoken to, we just have to think about how challenging it is within our own organisation to get all views and ideas. But I've got to say, like, Queensland and LGAQ are phenomenally representative, and they're at the table and they're talking on CDS, they're on the strategies. In New South Wales, we had a meeting 3 weeks ago, Kathy, on the response to the 47 million that both local government and the waste industry were at. You know, I think everyone is trying really hard to get across all these issues really quickly, and we are absolutely at the table on all of these issues, you know, and if you're not, I think it's fair to find out who maybe is before we assume we're not there, because there is so much dialogue going on at the moment and people are trying to get across so much. So, you know, I think we have to breathe a little and actually assume positive intent, and people are actually trying to do the right things and get the right information all the time. And don't underestimate how many times you'll talk to EPA and they go, I spoke to this company, and I kind of go, that's my job. But, you know, they're actually allowed to talk to industry too, and sometimes we don't necessarily know all that they're talking about, but they want to get other views too, which is absolutely the job of the regulator to do.
It is a busy time, and it's a busy panel. Ben?
Yeah, Ben Connell from Kimbrickie. I just wanted to talk to John's comment. I think what you're saying, John, is you're looking to upstream to the regulator and the policymaker to give you as many options and what you can do with your waste. I've got a live example. There's 2 private members' bills in front of the New South Wales Parliament as we speak. And I think, Kathy, you'd know what they are. You don't? Well, they're both to do with waste to energy from waste. Okay? One's from Stephen Barley, one's from Jeremy Buckingham. They're built on the back of a whole lot of public hysteria about one project. If they pass, and they are now at their second reading stage, what are you going to do as my regulator to make sure I can get a project when I've got a 15-kilometre exclusion zone from residential for these projects?
Do we have any representatives from Burke here?
And none of this is based on empirical evidence. It's all hysteria. My question is, what are you doing we've all got bosses, what are you doing with your bosses to make sure they understand this is ridiculous?
I think we sometimes, and I know that we're so close to it, so those 2 private member bills, that's politics. They're not going to get past the second reading stage. It's just not going to happen. Yeah, I am 100% sure that they will not even get to that second reading stage. And I think we've got to not the sad thing about what's happening with our industry is we're being used as a political football. You know, like, when my understanding of what happened in MEM is that literally they divided. Labor went one way and Liberal went another, which is really sad because this should be an issue above politics. It is absolutely true, and I think it's very personality driven at the moment. And we've got, WA has got a great new Environment Minister, and he is absolutely on the same page as his Victorian Minister and his Queensland Minister, and we've got so much attention as a result at the moment. And it was quite sad for me, because I probably put too much emphasis on MEM, that they actually then went a bit of the old school party bickering in my mind, and we didn't get quite as far as we should have got with that. Yeah, look, I think we shouldn't underestimate the politics of it, and it's like making a stand. But I guess my second point on that with the energy issue, I think we've got a big issue around educating the public. I think there's a real challenge, and I said this to a Greens senator in Victoria last week. I said, you might be Green, but you've got no idea what you're talking about these things. Can I please come and educate you, and in particular your colleague Jeremy, who's got less idea about it, on what the impact of energy for waste is, because you're scaring and you're wrong. So to the credit of the WAMA branch, and this is the beauty of WAMA and what it does, our RER groups, our Resource and Energy Recovery, are actually doing, and the New South Wales branch are doing FAQs at the moment, that we're going to then parlay and educate and go and see these people to try and dispel this. Because I think we got to sometimes not get emotional. As AMP said this week, anger is easy. We actually got to get out and educate about our industry and rebut this stuff. Yeah.
Just so that we can all get out for morning tea at some point. I'm just going to keep it moving. There's a gentleman down there.
Yeah, so James Turnell here from Armidale Regional. I just wanted to say a good positive thing. CDS came in and our reverse vending machines came in just before Christmas, and our community's absolutely embraced the CDS scheme. We've noticed good litter reductions in our parks, and our community, we've even got a busker that's sometimes at the RVM. It's become a social gathering point, and one of the comments we get is that why can't the concept of an incentivised return scheme be expanded to products which aren't necessarily seen in the litter stream? Because I think the community see it as this very logical approach to recovering products. So going through to white milk and even maybe a packaging deposit scheme. I might be a bit out there, but it's certainly talked about.
Okay, so Dominic, you guys are staying quiet in this space at the moment, but I guess that means that you've going to have the most time of everyone to think about what you can do, I guess, around this kernel. What are the thoughts? What are some of the things that you need to think about?
Yep, so Victoria hasn't committed to implementing a CDS, which leaves just us and Tasmania as a party of two there. We want to make sure that anything we implement stacks up in terms of cost benefits, and container deposit schemes they're really expensive and they're big, infrastructure heavy schemes to introduce for the outcomes that they give. I think given the recent changes with the China ban, we're re-looking at curbside recycling at the moment. We're looking at the importance of source separation. To be honest, in Victoria, we are thinking about that in terms of container deposit schemes and looking at the additional benefits that a container deposit scheme could bring, given in the context that we've got at the moment. It does add additional source separation, so that probably could even swing the cost benefits another way. So we're watching New South Wales very closely. But I think given that, and given a container deposit scheme is about both litter and recycling, and still cost benefits are sort of maybe just getting there, I think introducing a similar scheme for other types of recyclable materials could be a very expensive way to achieve a certain outcome. It's probably worth looking at, but there's probably other ways that we can increase the amount of recycling of those materials that may not be as expensive. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Mike has a question at the front.
Yeah, just a practical question. The ministers met last week. They put out a release for the first time in a long time. The federal minister said he wants to do action on waste and recycling. He mentioned that he would develop a new waste policy. What I'm seeking from the fantastic representation of the state members here is, can we get the states to re-endorse the 2009 waste policy as a reasonable starting framework for the development of a new national policy, so that we don't go back and reinvent the wheel for 3 years, but we can progress that document starting in a month's time for things like data and consistency, etc. It was an agreed policy framework in 2009. There's no reason it's not a good starting position in 2018. Can we get that simple step forward and get the federal minister to lead that process?
Jeff, you made the comment earlier that you guys have got a longer journey ahead than some of the other states. What do you think of Mike's suggestion?
Yeah, thanks for that question. My understanding is what the Commonwealth Government is wanting to lead on is an update of the 2009 strategy. So I was taking it that was at least our starting point. There's no sort of endorsed government position, I don't think, to that end. But certainly, as state government bureaucrats, we would take that as a starting point for our discussions. I can see the logic of your comment there. We are very interested to. This is an important step for us, because while the Commonwealth does engage in some of the discussions we have through HEPA, National Waste Working Group and so forth, this, I hope, is an indication that the Commonwealth will begin to lead those discussions more. So we would certainly welcome that, and take your point that we don't want to spend too much time reinventing the wheel. What we need to do is look at what the existing strategy gives us and how to build on that.
Okay.
Alex just said take it to the next step, so that's a good comment.
I'd love to throw that to everyone, but I'm conscious of the time. Alex.
Hi, Alex here from the National Waste and Recycling Industry Council. One issue that I've been working on, which has got me really worried, is PFOS. So these are the polyfluorinated flame retardant chemicals that have been found all over the army bases. They're causing big scandals. I've been consulting with wastewater treatment plants who are saying we're going to refuse any material contaminated with PFOS. I've been talking to landfills who said that our landfills are full of PFOS and we don't know what to do about it because it's designed to put fires out, so it can't be destroyed by anything other than a plasma arc.
So,
And
let me take the broader question on that
Yeah.
one, Tiana. So you guys have got your day jobs that were all happening before China ban and all these other things that we're now talking about. How do you respond and how do you do new things? Some of these other issues that are still thumping away in the background, how are you managing that, and how do you do that in your roles? How do you balance that?
We just love our work.
Excellent.
That's what I say. In regards to PFOS, again, that's been subject to extensive discussion at the national level. It's not something I closely interact with personally, but South Australia has put in PFOS ban requirements over a 2-year period into its water quality policy. So it's taking those steps there. I don't know if other panel members can answer better.
I find PFAS one of my other little passions right now, specifically, Alex, so I share it. I find that a really interesting one from a state by state. So I think there's the national discussion going on. There's also been, for example, the Prime Minister had a task force that had 80 people in Brisbane that WAMA with Veolia helped contribute to understand what was going on. So we've actually, this is a really strange one for me because you have the Commonwealth acting in a level as a kind of, in theory, a leader, but not really talking too much that I can see from a policy sense with the departments. You've also got the challenge that the enforcement in all the EPAs and all the states have to do something about this at the moment, and they appear to be doing slightly different things in every state. So some are told, you can't take it. Well, you show me how I can find PFOS in that pile from a visual inspection people, right? So we have this issue with how we enforce it regulatory on the ground based on whatever that policy is, and I guess it falls within your emerging contaminants. But then we also have the issue that it's way, way beyond just fire retardant. It's actually it's a fire retardant in everything from your frying pans to babies' clothes and other things that I just wasn't aware of. And I find it fascinating if we talk about waste and resource recovery policy, how the heck this stuff is still getting to market, right? So this is for me a classic example of our industry being the end of chain, no matter who you are, take, make, dispose, as opposed to even thinking, how do we even get this stuff still coming into our society from an extended producer responsibility in the first instance, and why do we have to end it? Because you cannot see this stuff, and even if you say you shouldn't have taken it, well, oops, I did, because I couldn't see it. How the heck are we going to clean this stuff up? And then a lot of these sites that, and then just to complicate it further, a lot of the sites are Commonwealth land in state because they're air bases and airports. So you have this really weird relationship with Commonwealth again as the owner, the tenant, the regulator. So, you know, for me, it's a really fascinating one that's really got a great opportunity for everyone to pull together and actually agree and do something. But it's not quite happening. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I just want to. Vina's got a question. Sorry, I'm going to have to speed everything up because we need to get out of here very shortly. But
so I was really just wanting to see if anybody has a comment around if there are manufacturers who are really keen to partner with recycling industries and to be able to create the high value end chain in terms of products. We've talked about the fact that there are probably not too many manufacturers here today, but really just wanting to hear from the panel if there is a desire and appetite looking forward into the future and creating niche manufacturing solutions, and if the manufacturers in Australia are interested, is that a sentiment that we might hear from representatives interested in, I guess, being a part of that journey?
Catherine?
I can say that at the moment we're designing a new grant program in response to national sort, and definitely in the development of that we have been speaking to plastics manufacturers, to Department of Industry and a range of people to, it's really the first time that we've been looking at, well, if we are to support these materials staying in a local domestic market, how can we best support manufacturers to perhaps, you know, become part of or grantees in this process. So those conversations are starting to happen, yep.
Sorry, there's a lady up this end. Sorry, just as that's moving over there. Alex, did you want to respond to that as well? I guess ACT is it's a smaller area. It's not too hard to find manufacturers and producers. What can you do to support?
Yeah, I guess certainly in terms of the ACT, because we have an ambitious diversion from landfill target to achieve in a short period of time, I'd certainly encourage engagement. So come and talk to the regulators, talk to the policy people. And one of the things I think to put back to industry as well, the challenge is make sure you bring the community along with what you're proposing, because there's a huge risk that a great solution is served up, but if the community isn't brought along, it's never going to get any traction. So that's a challenge I put out to industry.
Thank you. Bettina Zimmerman from GHD. We had so many talks about successful schemes, programs over these last couple of days, e-waste recycling, half waste, other resource recovery. And as you just mentioned in this discussion, there's the heads of EPA, they meet, there's the environment ministers meeting regularly. But what needs to happen to get national implementation of such programs? And in particular, where these programs are very successful on a smaller scale, how can we take these learnings and make it happen nationally?
No one's desperate to put their hand up for that, but Jeff, you're looking the most thoughtful.
I'll just...
Sorry, Dominic is desperate. Sorry. No, sorry. That's just...
Not necessarily.
That came out wrong. She's very keen to answer that question.
I have thoughts.
I'm fired. I won't be here next year. Sorry.
No, just saying. The national question is hard. I mean, thinking about the China trade restrictions that have caused us to rethink how we do recycling and how we look at the industry. One of the big questions has been, because it's a massive opportunity that we've got right now, we've got to take hold of it. But you kind of, it's something that's affecting the whole country. You need someone to lead that, because there's components of the solution, including product stewardship, circular economy, market development, that can only be done at the national scale. So looking at the situation right now and practically what we're looking at, it's state governments that have jumped up, and it's state governments that, because we have always had a lot of focus on waste and recycling, we're equipped and we're ready and we've got the information and the resources to respond to this. So at the moment, I think state governments are taking on a quasi-leadership role, which is not in itself adequate, because we're not getting the kind of the federal and the national buy-in. So it's going to do something, but it's going to miss some pieces. I think practically, given the federal government hasn't necessarily been extremely active in this space up until now, practically for them to get their resources up and their knowledge of the area and their capacity ready to lead a solution to this, I'm not convinced that it'll happen in time. I think they probably have the desire to do it, but I think given we've got to respond pretty quickly to this situation in order to get the momentum from the community, I'm not sure practically we're going to get that. I don't think we should sit back and wait for the national leadership from the Commonwealth Government. I'm not saying that they've been inadequate, I'm just saying practically they haven't necessarily been resourcing this space to respond to something like this. I think we are going to rely quite heavily on industry associations, because they do have the national reach and they have the view of what is happening nationally and what the issues are. I mean, Gail, you talk to all jurisdictions, you fly across the country all the time. You can see where we need to talk more and connect more nationally and where we can't. And we've already had a lot of advice from you and ACOR and...
I completely believe that.
You don't know what to do, let me tell you what to do.
And APCO as well, which has been, I think, extremely important in this time, because that's the perspective that we need right now.
We're going to have to wrap up, but I want to end on something as exciting and inspirational as I can, Jeff, and I'm looking you in the eye deliberately. But if I look around what's outside of our responses to some of these external factors, if I look around at things that have happened, Queensland has been a little bit slow, laggard for a while. But one of the really exciting things that's kind of been overtaking all this noise is that Queensland is now making moves to move forward. So tell us what's that going to mean for the nation when we don't have Queensland, I guess.
Yeah, and it is an exciting time in Queensland, and we appreciate very much that the recent attention on the industry has been hard for the industry. But let me say, it's also really placed some of these things that we've been discussing for a long time right at the forefront of the community discussion. And so that's a really important thing for us as we go ahead and develop new policies that have been a difficult place or difficult space to make policy in the past. Obviously, the issue of a levy's been something that has been grappled with in Queensland for some time, but now there is a huge momentum towards state government, local governments, communities working together with industry to actually really tackle these challenges. Look at the recycling rates that we've got that are, performing, worst amongst the mainland states, is my understanding. Queenslanders don't like to be behind the other states. We don't like coming to conferences like this, and my first answer to the question on energy from waste is, yeah, we're behind the other states when it comes to developing an energy from waste policy. You might have noticed something about Queenslanders. We tend not to like being at the bottom. So it's an exciting time for us to start to change that. And so, Garth, in terms of what's to come, yes, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're not quite working from a blank sheet of paper, but we do have that type of opportunity that you don't get very often in the policy space to really look right across the spectrum of what other states and what innovation is occurring in the industry and say, yes, we want that for Queensland as well. And we want to pick up what's happening in the other places when it comes to, the innovative industry. So my answer to the question from over there before is just a simple yes. Queensland already has a range of innovation programs in place, and we want to, through our waste strategy, look at the opportunities to leverage those to see how we can really encourage that investment in innovative technologies in resource recovery for Queensland.
I think that's okay, as long as it's inspirational and happy, because
It is inspirational as well. I think. Product stewardship is obviously one of our key opportunities. I just want to remind everyone in this audience that the Product Stewardship Act review is open until the 29th of June, and I think when it comes to working together for better design, better outcomes, circular economy, please contribute to that Australian Government review.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. And look, everyone, thanks very much to everyone who's come on. It's hard. I made their life hard. They couldn't prepare notes, and they knew they were going to face random questioning from inside my head, which doesn't make life easy. It is a scary place, yeah. But the thing that I'm hearing from all this is we need to keep that conversation going, and these guys need to talk. We need to be feeding that information through them, and events like this and other events, we need to be contributing to the conversation, not just listening, but contributing. So thank you, everybody. Sorry. Oh, you're